Welcome to day 5 of the workshop. Today we're going to be building our level, getting our camera and our player to scroll through our level. We're going to look how we can build prefabs, meaning a collection of prefabs of our environment parts to make hero props so we can scatter throughout our level. Our camera controller controls that screen scroll I was talking about. We'll go over some basic level design theory and some basic enemy design tips. Today, you're going to complete a level that you can fly through, and you're going to begin to place enemies in your level as well. All right, so very important that we've really nailed out the previous days in the camp. If your enemies aren't working well, you're going to have a lot of trouble placing them in your level. So make sure you have at least one good working enemy that you can start placing and testing your level with. All right, so why don't we just jump into how we can make a camera controller. Okay, I'm going to bring in Unity. And here I have my start scene. Hopefully you've been saving your work in your start scene. I know you were probably building enemies and stuff inside of it. But for right now, let's make sure we only have our player in our start scene right now. If you have other enemies in here, make sure they're saved as prefabs. You'll know they're a prefab if their text is blue. If their text is blue, go ahead and select your enemies and hit the apply button right up here in the top right of our inspector. Remember that apply button? That's kind of like saving the settings of our prefab. All right. So what we have to do first to get our screen controller to work is make sure we have a screen controller game object in our hierarchy. You might already have one for testing purposes with our enemies. In case you don't, I'm going to go ahead and make a brand new one. So there's my empty game object. I'll come up here in my inspector. I'll call this screen controller. And really look at the spelling here and the capitalization. Literally, spelling and capitalization and space counts because they'll have a script running in the background that looks for the exact characters that you see here. So capital S, a space in between, and a capital C. All right, let's go ahead and reset those values by clicking on our gear cog and hitting reset. So what we're going to do next is place two objects under here. Oh, it looks like it didn't save my screen controller. Let me rename it. All right, so what I'm going to do next is place my player under screen controller and my camera under screen controller. So why do we do that? Well, our screen controller is basically going to scroll through the level, and it's going to bring my player and the camera along with us. So what we get, let me bring over and slide my character over here. What we get, well, you can't see it in the game view because there's no, the level pretty much looks the same. But what you'll see is you'll get a screen controller that works left and right, that brings our camera with us and our player. This is basically what controls the scrolling through our level. So what we're going to do next is we're going to attach some scripts to some of these objects that we've made so far. So with my screen controller selected in my hierarchy, I'm going to go over to my inspector. I'm going to add component, scripts, screen mover. I'm going to set the speed to around 75 or so. And it's asking for a boss fight position. All right, so we'll get to that in a second. But the main thing is I have my script on it. Next, I'm going to expand my screen controller and select main camera right here. And in my inspector, first thing I'm going to do is make sure I have a skybox. If you don't see skybox on here, you can go to, let's pretend like I don't have it. We can go to add component, rendering, skybox. And then it's asking for a material. We can find a material by clicking on our little bullseye. And it opens up this little window right here. I'm going to choose Sun Skybox. And when you select the skybox, If you have your game tab open, I know that a lot of you probably have yours docked together. But look what happens whenever I'm going to set this to 16:9. Look what happens whenever I have my game view. Now I have a background of space, finally. We don't see it in my scene view quite yet. All right, next I'm going to go in and add a new script to my camera. So I have main camera selected over here in my hierarchy. All right, right underneath screen controller. And I'm going to go to add component, scripts, and look for skybox behavior. It's going to ask for skybox. I'm just going to click the skybox up here and drag and drop. Left click, drag and drop. Start position, I'm going to set to maybe 75. Rotation speed 2. Basically what this script does is it rotates the skybox behind us so we can see, so it looks like we're moving through space a little bit more. Why don't we go ahead and hit play and see what that looks like. So you can see that my skybox, you can see this little stars closely getting, and it looks like I'm flying through space, but I'm not quite flying through my level yet. It looks like I am, but I'm not. So let's see how we can get flying through my level. To really get flying through the level, we have a few variables to assign, and the main one being our boss fight location. All right, so basically our boss fight location, we're going to create an empty, or actually we could create an empty object, but I kind of want to be able to see, physically see where my end of my level, where my boss would be. So I'm going to go to game object, 3D object, and I'm going to create this cube right here. Okay, and in my inspector up here on the top right of my screen, I'm going to call this boss fight location. The spelling doesn't quite matter right here, so you can just call it the boss location with no spaces if you wanted. All right, so it doesn't matter. I'm going to go ahead and name it back boss fight location. And we want to reset its values so it's zeroed out. And our cube's really small because our scene is pretty big because it's a space level. So why don't we scale up this boss fight location cube to 50, 50, 50. All right, perfect. And then we have this new cube right here. Let me go to my scene view. Right here where my player is. And what we want to do is we want to kind of push it down the level, depending on how long we want to make the level. I like to put mine at like 6,000. So here's my player right here, and that's where the end of my level is going to be. All right. We'll just leave this box showing for now. In the future, we can click this mesh renderer. Let me zoom into the scene right here. There's my cube. If I uncheck mesh renderer, then my cube still exists, but it's not drawn in the scene. And that's pretty good. But for right now, I'm going to select my boss fight location cube and turn back on mesh render so I can see where my boss will be. So what am I going to do with this boss fight location? Well, first, I'm going to go to my screen controller in my hierarchy, right up there. And I'm going to take this boss fight location object and drag and drop it over here onto the right side of the screen in my inspector. And this will tell my screen mover when to stop moving to the right or left. Okay. If you want your screen to move left, you can check this. If you want it to move right, like a typical side scroller game, you can leave it unchecked. All right, great. So the next thing I'm going to do is go to my main camera, and it looks like I've already attached my skybox script to my skybox. So I'm just going to click the skybox component and drag and drop it right here. That looks good. And it looks like the last thing I have to do is to go in and select my game manager in my hierarchy right here. I'm going to make sure that in the inspector, both of these check boxes are checked. So if any of these are unchecked, go ahead and make sure the object is checked and my GM script is checked. All right. Next, I'm going to take my boss fight. Actually, no. I'm going to select my screen controller, no, select my game manager again. There's my GM script. I'm going to take my screen controller object and I'm going to drag and drop it right over there onto my GM script. So you can see that screen controller has a variable assigned to it now of my screen controller. And we'll get to these guys next video. You'll probably get some error messages in your console saying that these are missing, but it's nothing that's going to break the game right now. Alright, so the only thing left to do now is to test our level. And you know what? It might be a little hard to test if we're flying through the level, if we don't have a point of reference to see us flying by. So for right now, I'm going to grab my boss fight cube. I'm going to bring it kind of in front of my player here. So this will tell me if I fly past the cube, I'll know I'm in business and everything's working. So I'll press play. You can see that my cube's just sitting there. What's going on? I'm not going through my level. Well, we have to press enter on the keyboard. So I press enter and boom. You can see my flare flying. Oh, and it looks like it stops when it gets to the boss fight location, like it should. So now we know both of those two functions are working. All right, great. So that does it for part one. Now we have a screen controller that is able to move us through our level. I want to take my boss fight location and in the Z position, I'm going to drop it back to 6,000 units. 6,000 meters over here. So roughly my level is going to be 6,000 meters long right now. Sounds like a good time to go to save scene as. And now we can start calling it something like a level A001. I don't know. That's just a naming convention I came up with. And we can save. Next, we're going to start seeing how we can use some environmental pieces and start building what our level may look like. Right now, our level just consists of these top and bottom boundaries. These are just here so we know physically what part of the screen our ship has to be confined in. It'll make placing our ceiling and floor of our level much easier. So why don't we just get through the whole process of creating this ceiling and floor prefab. Okay, so it's quite easy. First of all, we have to make sure we're in the right folder. So I'm going to go to Assets, stay away from our top folder. It may be called Don't Touch for you or whatever, but basically that's not where we want to be. We want to go to Assets, Prefabs, Parts, Environment Parts, and here are all the prefabs that I've already got made for you guys of different environment parts. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all of these except our beams and give you a little preview of each one. There's like just a straight beam, environmental beam. Here's like a bent beam. There's another bent beam. But for the most part, we're just going to be using blocks to build our level. There's a little preview of them. You'll notice there's 5 walls. Here's bolts. There's inlay. There is panel right here. Here is patch. It's all patchy and whatever. And here's round, kind of like a round panel. And each one of these walls has a counterpart with some damage modeled into it. You can see all this damage right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a section of, let's say, the ceiling of our level. Okay, and we're going to just kind of take random one of these. You don't want them to be in order too much. So I'm just going to randomly select my wall patch and just drag and drop it into my hierarchy. In case you missed that, I just picked one of these wall pieces and clicked and dragged and dropped into my hierarchy. Now my player is like directly inside this wall, so I'm going to expand screen controller and move him kind of up and away. Because I'm going to create a parade of walls straight into the scene. So I'm just going to start dragging in random walls, and I'm going to move them to the right. I'm going to move them forward or backwards, and move them up or down. So basically, we're kind of creating interlocking walls, kind of like this was an abandoned industrial space dock or something, just an industrial space place. So grab just a random one, move it over, and we kind of just want them to barely intersect. I don't want to do crazy heights. I'm just trying to create just a nice floor ceiling. And then if we want to adjust the heights of this later on, we can. For right now, let's just get a nice easy thing going on right here. All right, and so I'm just going to keep doing this. There's another patch. You kind of want to avoid, I already have a damaged patch wall right here. You want to add a little bit of variation. You don't want to just keep doing, you know, the same wall over and over again. I mean, you might. I don't want to. I want to add randomness. Oh, and I already got that wall. See how I just said I want to add randomness? I picked that one. So, yeah, kind of stay away from picking the same one too much over and over again. After a while, you'll understand what's going on. Do I have panel yet? No, I don't have damaged panel. And you might be tempted just to take like this damaged panel and just drag and drop it. Well, look how terribly it placed it into my level. Not right down the center at all. Why did it do that? Well, instead of dragging it into my hierarchy, right over here, I just kind of placed it in my level. And there's no telling where things get placed when you do that. So that's why I kind of avoid just dragging and dropping things into my scene. Because there's just no way to know where it's going to be placed. All right, so I'm just going to quickly finish building this out. Inlay. Another inlay. Maybe this time, have I done just regular bolt? I have. Panel. Yeah. Patch. Alright, I've used patch before, but that's alright. You'll notice that these blocks don't have a backside. They just have every side, top, bottom, left, right, except that back one, because we're not going to see the walls from the back. So don't worry about them too much. There's an inlay. Do I have a round? No, I don't have round in at all. I'm going to take my round right here, and I'm just going to kind of change up the order just a little bit, because I'm going to have my round right there. That way I can bring in my damaged round. You see this one right here? See how we have this one and this one? This one has damage. I don't want them too close to one another, so I'm going to go ahead and just bring them down. Press F to zoom in on it a little bit. And there we go. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You want about 8 to 12 different pieces right here. All right. So I got these all in a line. What I need to do now is I need to make these a prefab. But these are already prefabs. I mean, why would you do that? Well, just bear with me. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of make like a little copy and paste prefab that we can keep adding over and over. So I'm going to make a new empty game object. I'm going to reset its values. See, that's the center of the screen right there. I want to grab these and kind of make sure I'm in the center. So I'm going to put I moved them around. I want to make sure my very first wall piece is more or less in the center of the screen. Very nice. That's the center of the screen where my empty game object is. I'm going to call this ceiling or floor piece. So that's what I've named the game object, ceiling floor piece. And I'm going to select all my pieces right here. I'm going to left click the very top one, hold down left shift key on the keyboard, and click the bottom one. That'll collect. Select everything in between my 2 clicks if I hold down the shift. Then again, I'm just going to drag and drop them. And here I have the ceiling floor piece. And you know what? You don't even have to make this a prefab if you don't want to, but I'm going to. So I'm going to navigate to Assets, Prefabs, and I'm going to collapse that ceiling floor piece I'm going to drag and drop it right down into my prefabs. And now I have a floor piece that I can keep using over and over again. And so before I start building the rest of my level, I'm going to show us how we can use layers in Unity to lock out certain parts of the game so we can't accidentally delete them out of our scene or edit them or interact with them with pretty much any way within our scene view. All right, so what I want to do is I want to put my ceiling floor piece into like an environment layer so I can lock it out in the future whenever I'm happy with where it's placed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go select my ceiling floor piece. I'm going to go to my inspector in the top right hand corner, right up here. And you see where it has tag, layer, prefab. We're familiar with some of these so far, but we haven't done anything with layers. So I'm going to click the drop down thing with layer, and it's going to go to add layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to user layer 8 or so, and environment. I'm going to call this environment. And what this does is it creates a new layer called environment, layers, and I can prove it. I can click my layers, drop down up here, and now I have environment right there. So you'll notice that when I created my new layer, it deselected my ceiling floor piece. Let me select it again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my layer drop down again where it says default. And you know where we said add layer before? Well, look what showed up now. We now have an environment layer. So I'm going to add it. And whenever you add it to an environment layer, it's going to ask, do you want to just set it to just the ceiling floor piece game object? Or do you want to set it for everything under this group? So basically, all the children within my ceiling floor piece game object, yes. Basically, that takes my empty game object is now under layer environment. And now every single piece underneath contained in my ceiling floor piece is more or less a part of my environment. All right, great. And we can use environments to our advantage. I'm going to go ahead and show you what environments can do for us, or what layers rather can do for us. So now that I have these parts of my ceiling and floor in a layer, I can go up here kind of towards my inspector, but it's not quite my inspector. It's in this little menu area right above it. And I'm going to click on layers. Let me see if I can get all this in view. I'm going to click layers. And what we can do, you can see my ceiling floor pieces over here in my scene view to the left. Layers allow us to hide different objects within this layer. It also allows us to lock everything in that layer. And this is great. When we press the lock key, look what happens. I'm going to deselect my ceiling and floor pieces. And I'm going to drag a big box around all this. Notice how the player was selected, my boundaries were selected, even my cube in the distance was selected. Notice what wasn't selected? My environment. So this is great when you're building your level. You like what you have, you can lock it down into a layer. You can even hide it if you want. But I'm going to unlock it for now, like so. So now I can select the different pieces. All right, great. So when do I get back to building the ceiling of my level? Before I do that, I'm going to go to Game Object, Create Empty Game Object. So you know this drill by now. Basically, I'm creating empty game objects so I can organize my hierarchy up here. I'm going to call this ceiling, and I'm going to duplicate this, and it says ceiling 1. I'm actually going to call this floor. All right, so now I have two wrappers that I can eventually put my ceiling floor pieces into. But before that, why don't we go ahead and place these in our level? So hopefully you still have your boundaries showing. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a ceiling just by dragging this whole row up and loosely kind of lining up the bottom of my row of walls here, right with the bottom of my boundary here. All right, great. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate this actually. And all I'm going to do next is just drag it down. So now I'm going to take the second duplicated piece and just hook it up, maybe just kind of tweak it like so, hook it up right into my last floor piece. And this is where things get fun. I'm going to select ceiling floor piece 0 or nothing, just regular ceiling floor piece. In ceiling floor piece 1, that selects both prefabs. I'll hit Control D again, and we can duplicate that whole chain even more. So now we're building our ceiling at an exponential rate. That looks about right. And there's where my boss fight is. So I'm just going to select one more. I'm not going to select all 4 of these. I mean, you could do that and you just have a really long level. I'm going to undo that because I really only need one more piece. I'm going to select ceiling floor piece 2, hit Control and duplicate, move it forward. And now my ceiling and walls stop right at my boss. And that's my ceiling. Not too bad. So I'm going to select all the ceiling floor pieces right here, drag and drop them onto ceiling, and there's my ceiling. Perfect. So what we're going to do with my floor, you know what? I got an idea. I made a floor group. I'm going to delete it because next I'm going to take ceiling and just duplicate my ceiling. Now I'm going to call this floor. Why did I do it that way? Well, now here's my floor. Perfect. But is it? Because it's mirroring my ceiling exactly. So there's that piece. There's the same piece right below it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take my floor and I'm going to expand it. And I'm just going to want to see all my different prefabs right here. I'm going to take them all. I'm going to move them forward just a little bit, like so. Just enough to break up, the repetition. All right. So, but now I don't really have an uneven floor thing going on. Well, that's okay. I can take these pieces down here and drag them back to the front. But won't that mess up my prefab? Don't worry about it. We're kind of just making our prefabs do some heavy lifting at first. Then, after we place our major prefabs down in our level, we can then go in and start editing them. So I'm going to select this last little prefab row of the floor. And you'll notice that if I try to select this brick, it selects everything. What just happened? All right, so I'm going to click it once, then click it again. There we go. That's how we can select individual objects within a prefab. I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to select these 4 guys. And look what I'm going to do. I'm just going to drag them to the beginning of my level. We're just offsetting my floor just a little bit, so it looks a little bit more unique for us. Great. And there's my ceiling and floor. And you know what I can do with my boundaries now? I can select my boundaries, then go up to my inspector and turn them off. Now I don't need my boundaries anymore because I have my ceiling and floor. Let's take my player character right here, and I'm going to zero him out again in my inspector. 0, 0, 0. So he's in the center of my screen again. And why don't we test our level, see where we're at right now. So I'll press play. Nothing's moving. You can see, just barely see the top of my ceiling and the bottom of my floor. I press enter, and now we're moving into this industrial area, like maybe a dry dock for some big capital ships that's been destroyed or neglected. I don't know. Just an industrial feel through our level. All right, perfect. So we've done a lot of stuff. We got our screen controller working, and now we have kind of a boundary for my level. I want to take note of something here. So right now, So right now, the way I have my ceiling and floor positioned, I can fly all the way up to the screen and not be destroyed, kind of down to the screen and not be destroyed. So what's up with that? Remember how we choked the, let me select my player in my hierarchy. We'll expand screen controller and select player. We're going to expand my player mover script. And remember we had in our player mover our Y minimum, Y max. Look what happens when I change my Y minimum to maybe like 210 and negative 210 and 210 for my min and max. And now I'm going to press play. Oh, I unchoked my player's movement boundary just enough to where I can keep flying upwards and be destroyed on my ceiling and floor. So that's a decision you need to make as a designer. You want your player to be able to hug the top and the bottom of the screen without dying, or do you want them to be, as soon as you get too close to anything, you can be destroyed by the environment. So that's something up to you. I'm going to leave mine a little bit more forgiving. So I'm going to set my Y min and max at 200, and your mileage may vary depending on exactly where you put your floor and ceiling. But now I can't be destroyed. I choked my movement. I mean, it doesn't really make too much sense because my wings going through it. So, but it's easy mode if you want easy mode. So, and who knows, maybe part of your floor or environment. See, that was up just enough right there to destroy my ship. So you got to be careful about exactly where you place your floor and ceiling versus your Y minimum and Y maximum values on your player mover script right here on your player character. Okay, now that we've got a ceiling and floor, we need to start adding more interesting shapes to our level. Again, I'm going to grab my player. Let's go into my scene view. There's my player. I'm going to grab my player and just kind of move him out of the way for now. Not totally off screen, because what if I want to test, But I'll put him in the bottom left of my screen. Next, what I'm going to do is start making hero props, or what we call set pieces, for our level. So to do that, I'm going to create a wrapper with an empty game object, just something that we can contain my set piece in. And I'm going to reset its value to 0. And this is where I'm going to start building some interesting things. So I'm going to go to Assets, Prefabs, Parts, Environment Parts. I'm just going to start grabbing walls. And I'm going to build, I don't know, maybe like a flat wall, like so, held together by a beam, like this. So there's something important we need to take note of with the way our parts are. Something we need to keep in mind with our colliders, as I was saying earlier. Every one of these little parts and prefabs, if I turn off my mesh renderer on them, look what's left. A wireframe of my box collider. So yeah, pretty self-explanatory on my walls, right? A box collider on a box wall. But look at my beam right here. Well, that's pretty easy too. There's a box collider around it. Okay. And the thing you got to keep in mind is if you keep your beam centered in the X, like so, your player's going to run into this beam and die. Look what happens here. I'll do an example. Boom, died into the beam. Look what happens if we move my beam a little bit forward. Maybe my player will miss. Let's see. Ooh, look at that. That has potential to make secret areas in the level, huh? Looks like we can't go through it, but in fact, it's far enough forward where we can. This gets a little bit more complicated when we start bringing in maybe a bent beam. look how the box collider for this had to act. So we see the beam from this angle, but if I was the player, it would look like I could fly through this area, but in actuality, my box collider kind of takes up more than what the beam expresses with its shape. So whenever you're placing your beams and you start rotating them and stuff, this and that, keep in mind where your colliders are going to be, okay? Because now I have this beam. Let me scale it a little bit. So what was once a beam that I could just pass in and out of now has another beam that I can run into. So just be thoughtful with your colliders. Alright, so I'm going to pretend like this is one of my set pieces right here. You know, the tricky, I can fly behind this beam but not get through this one piece. And to emphasize what's flyable and what's not, you may want to kind of exaggerate, you know, what's going on here. I mean, if I see a bunch of beams like this going on right here, that tells me as a player, there's no way I'm getting through that really. So might as well not even try. Okay? So it's the difference between being like, hey, maybe I can pass through that one versus, well, there's just two beams right there. There's no way. All right. So I like that game object. I'm going to take all the parts and pieces, and I think I made this empty game object earlier. I never haven't named it yet. So if you don't have an empty game object to group these in yet, that's you may want to go ahead and do it. You want to make sure that anytime you group these things, parts, into an empty game object, you want to make sure that it's reset up here in our inspector. So we'll grab my mouse wheel or little gear cog and hit reset. And what we call this set piece A. Great. So I'm going to zoom out. And now with set piece A zeroed out and named, I'm going to grab all my pieces here and drag and drop them onto set piece A. And look, now I get a little piece I can start, a little prefab or a template. To formalize it as a prefab, we'll grab set piece A and we'll drag and drop it into prefabs. And what you can do is you can make a myriad or just a huge collection of these little set piece. In fact, I can go and duplicate set piece A and call it set piece B. I can get rid of these two little guys right here. It's going to ask if you want to break the prefab. Yeah, let's do it. And now I can actually make this set piece the way where we can fly through it. Since it's called set piece B, I'll need to come in and drag and drop it into my prefabs. At a certain point, your assets window may fill up and you can't drag and drop stuff without putting it under something else. So we need to figure out what to do here. Well, there's two options we can do to make this a prefab at this point. I could click and drag and drop it under prefabs, not parts, but drag and drop it. Well, no, looks like we do want to put it in prefabs. So understanding your folder structure is going to be important. So a lot of my other prefabs I made are just under assets prefabs. So I'm going to click and drag and drop it right over here under my collapsible outliner. And there's set piece A and set piece B ready to go. So I would go ahead and spend some time and just make a bunch of these set pieces. That way, when we start building our level, you can just drag out these set pieces to quickly fill out some space. And then later you can go in and tweak them and make them individual and make them unique. So with this part 4, I'm going to start setting or placing set pieces around the level. And then I can go in and start really editing things to make my level more and more unique as we go. So I already have some example things that I've made. So I'm going to go to my examples folder, prefabs, environment, hero pieces. And I have about 12 different pieces of wreckage. You can see little previews of them here. There's that one. There's that one. Here we go with these. Here's a nice little column thing where I have to fly through it. A nice little pyramid. I don't know, just random things like this. Here's something that kind of goes into the background. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to place at least one instance of all these pieces of wreckage through my level. So you can kind of get a sense of how we can use set pieces. So I'm going to just click Wreckage 01 all the way to 12. Just drag them all into my scene so I know what's up. No, I don't like the way I did that. I'll drag them in one at a time. So here's this piece. And your hero props may not be zeroed out. Some of my wreckage prefabs are already kind of at a weird position, as you can see. So be careful of how you saved your hero pieces, because they might just come in a weird style. So I'm going to go ahead and maybe put this one, maybe make it a little bit more difficult to enter my level. And I don't like the way that's pointing this way, so I'm going to come in and rotate it down. All right, great. Let's do something like that. I don't like the way that ceiling's coming in. So I'm going to just delete it. You're going to break the prefab, are you sure? Yeah, because the prefab served its purpose by duplicating my floor all the way down. Now we just need to get in and start making some unique stuff. All right, so wreckage 3 is coming in. And why don't I just put it right there? Here's wreckage 4. Not too bad. I kind of want to make this an even narrower one, so I'm going to grab this piece, that piece, and this piece, and we're going to edit this prefab a little bit just by bringing it the rest of the way down. In fact, I can grab this and just make it real narrow. So what I'm basically doing is I'm going in and I'm tweaking the hero pieces I've already made. And there you go. That's going to be a tight cord to fly through. Okay, great. So that was wreckage 4. Why don't we bring in wreckage 5? Ooh, here's a cool little thing. So basically, I have a piece of geometry, and I kind of want to turn it upside down, so I can either rotate it upside down, like so, or maybe I can do a -1 in the Y scale. See how I did -1 there? And that should do it too. You'll notice that I have like geometry coming out, so when we fly through, we can kind of get a sense of depth. And you should be able to run into these and die. So why do I have the colliders like that's crazy? Seems like a cheap way to get hit by something. So maybe bring it forward just a little bit. And notice how they just kind of terminate into nothing. Our camera's not going to see what they go into. So let's bring in 6. I'll just place it kind of right here. Here's 7. I think with 7, I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. Maybe scale it, the whole prefab down a little bit. Duplicate it. And in my z-axis, or rotate it -90. And create some kind of like diamond looking thing here. That's not quite working the way I want it. Okay, so we're going to do this. Let's make it 7. I'm going to scale it back to 1, 1, 1, 1. Now I'm going to duplicate it and do a -1 in the Z. What happened here? 1. All right, maybe in the X. Nope. I want to mirror it. There we go, -1 in the Y. So now it kind of matches up perfect. I'm going to bring this forward a little bit so they don't flicker through each other. Maybe not make it too perfect. But here's this little star thing, and then I can scale them a little bit. And my player will have to figure out a way to fly through it. Maybe shrink it down in the Y. Maybe make it less tall. There we go. Here is a new piece. Ooh, I know what I can do with this. I can put it in the center here. And look, so this brick right here kind of was holding this diamond thing. You can see I have some geometry in the background. That's fine. That's like set dressing. That's making it look cool. 9. What's going on here? I think I'm just going to have this kind of like derelictly placed on that level. Like it's just floating there. Derelictly, I think that's a new adjective I just made. And then I have this madness right here. Ooh, it looks like I can actually fly through this right here, right? That'll be a nice little thing for the player to figure out. And here's 11. At the end of the day, the player needs to know what he can go behind and what he can't. So while it might be tempting to do something like this, we might be able to see the backside of those anyway. So I'm going to make sure that the player will be able to collide with all of this. Like so, it's just a matter of seeing what hitboxes are lining up on the X. Now, it looks like I should be able to run into all of that. And let's bring in my last hero prop. Well, it was way down there. And it looks like it's just kind of like a background piece. And I'm going to have them kind of connected. Like so, whatever. Okay. And just to fill out the rest of my level, I'm going to do something like that. Just duplicate it all again. Maybe delete pieces that up, coincide with the boss battle. And I want my boss battle to take place in outer space. So I'm going to delete some of these. Yep, we're going to break those prefabs. It's fine. Why is it okay to break these prefabs and maybe not another one? Well, because we were only using those prefabs in order to place them in the level a little bit easier. Now that they're placed the way we want it, we can break them so we can kind of come in and edit what's going on here. So we'll do something like this again. And it's not cool to have the same kind of thing in my level again. So I'm going to delete this, delete that. Let's bring in this wreckage right here. Do something like that. That pyramid's too tall. Yeah, we'll break that prefab. No big deal. And I'm not going to break this one by the way. I'm going to rotate it up all weird. And here's that little wall I had. I'm just going to delete the bottom piece of it. And maybe duplicate this in. And I'm going to rotate it. And nobody's going to ever know that's the same hero piece. Because it's been rotated all crazy. So that's going to be a little weird spot. I'm going to shrink this down so my player can get through it a little easier. Alright, great. Why don't we fly through the level now? So here we go. You know what? I'm going to turn my screen controller up. And we can already see that my outliner or my hierarchy is a mess. Alright, whatever. I'll come back and fix it. I'm going to select my screen controller. I'm going to set it at double speed. And away we go. There's that piece that's jutting out, that random piece floating. So it's kind of like we're floating through just like a destroyed industrial thing, like I was saying earlier, until we get to my boss and we stop. This is where we'll be fighting the boss. Hopefully he'll be hovering around here somewhere. Which brings me to my next point. Enemy placement will be the next topic that we discuss. So hopefully we have a lot of good enemy prefabs going on. Okay? Prefabs. And I seem like I do have some good uh, enemy prefabs going. Um, Seems like I got ahead of myself though with enemy placement. I just looked at my hierarchy. Look how terrible this all looks. No good. And plus, we don't want to actually be touching our environment as we're placing enemies because we could accidentally mess something up. Why don't we see how we can organize my hierarchy real quick? Oh, look how much of a pain that is to click through everything. So I have an empty game object called environment. I'm going to delete it. I'll just go ahead and make a new one so you can see me making it. Make a new empty game object, environment. And guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to take my ceiling and my floor and place it under environment. And every single wreckage set piece, place it under environment. And so now I have my whole environment under one group. And guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to put it in a layer. So with environment selected here, go to layers, or actually, environment selected, go to layer, see where it says default. Now we're going to put it in environment. Now it's going to ask us if we want to just put environment, this little empty game object, into that layer, or everything contained under environment. So we want everything, right? Everything highlighted here. So we'll click yes, children. That means the children basically are everything underneath this little environment drop down. So now everything is considered an environment. You can see the layers up here. Now I'm going to click my drop down layers right up here. Now I can hide my whole level. Well, looks like something got lost. Oop, looks like I left this wreckage out of the group. So I'll drag and drop that under environment. And you know what? Since I added a new piece, um, it's still not being hidden. So how do I get that? I can either select the new wreckage 005 number 2 and set its layered environment. I could do that for sure. But since I already have it under environment, why don't I just set environment, set its layer again, set layer to environment. It's going to ask if you want children as well. Yep. This time that scraggling piece of geometry for forgot was in my environment group when I clicked yes to all children. Now I can hide all pieces of my level. But more importantly, if I zoom in, I can click the little lock. Now I can't select anything in my environment, and I can just worry about placing enemies without accidentally selecting something and deleting it. Alright, great. Okay, so enemy placement. The biggest rule about enemy placement is know what your enemy's behavior is. Alright? So, what does that even mean? Well, I go to my prefabs folder down here, and I have a bunch of enemies. Enemy boss, dogfighter, standard, turret. So I have 4 different enemies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag enemy standard into my hierarchy. And here we have an enemy just chilling. And basically the way I have the script set up is whenever we press play, Let's put the enemy off screen. Okay. So my enemy's off screen. I'm going to turn off maximize on play on my game screen. Let me readjust some so I can see game real estate on both things. Alright, so I'm going to hit play. I want you to see what happens when I press play. My ship disappears. My enemy disappears. Alright, I don't think it's a bad thing. And I'm shooting bullets. You can see my bullets passing through the enemy. Nothing's happening. I'm going to hit enter. And then when I get a certain distance to the enemy, it becomes active. I'm going to place it even further into my scene. Maybe let's put it right in between these two pillars. So the way I've got it coded is every enemy checks to see its distance from my screen controller right here. And whenever it gets close enough, it activates the enemy for us. So watch this. What do we get from this view in our scene? We'll press play. Our enemy's gone right now in the pillar. But now we're going to fly, fly, fly. And there, as soon as I get close enough, the enemy activates. He comes rushing straight at my player. So why is my enemy doing that? Why is my enemy behaving like that? Well, in my AI script and my stat script, I have just a really basic setup where my enemy does nothing but flies forward. There's something we can do here to make my enemy a little bit more interesting. I can have my enemy spawn from behind my player. So here, why don't we have an enemy that spawns inside these little pillars? But why don't we also have another enemy that will spawn behind my player, or two enemies that will spawn behind my player when I pass them. So there's my two enemies. I'm going to select both of them. And in my enemy AI script, I'm going to click attack from behind. So I want you guys to see what happens the way my enemies spawn when attacking from behind. Alright, so here's my enemy attacking from the front. There are my two enemies attacking from behind. I hit play. My enemies disappear. Notice how these two enemies aren't there until they aren't. And now I get enemies. You know what? I'm too fast for my enemies. I'm going to select them. They weren't able to catch up to my screen controller. So I'm going to go to grab my screen controller up here in my hierarchy. And I'm just going to slow the speed down through my level. That way my behind enemies can catch up. I hit play. Notice how when I get close enough, my front facing enemy activates and he comes real mad at me. And notice how now I have my behind enemies spawning and slowly catching up until they hit those walls. So that's something you'll need to know about the way your enemies behave. Do they attack from behind? If so, click yes. Or do they attack from the front? If so, uncheck it for false. Okay, great. So why don't we go ahead and add a few different more enemies in. I'm going to put a turret in. So there's my turret. I'm going to put it in a place where my player can actually shoot at it though. So I probably won't be able to hit it right there, but it looks like a good place for one. So there's an enemy turret right there. I'm going to duplicate it and rotate it 180 degrees in the X so I can put it upside down and place it right up in there. Keep your enemies on the X axis at all costs. Notice how my enemy turret's about to hang off the edge of this. You got to keep it centered in the X. Alright, so there's two turret enemies. This is a pretty big open space. So I'm going to bring in my dogfighter enemy. Dogfighter enemies need a lot of space to come in and attack. I'm going to put him right here. And I'm going to have my enemy dogfighter. Let me turn off Destiny. I'm going to have my enemy dogfighter attack from behind. So why don't we see what happens in my level now? And I'll kind of keep my view right here. So, whoa, my turrets were just destroyed. What's up with that? Well, it looks like my colliders are colliding with the environment and destroying my turret. So what can I do? This is a problem, isn't it? Alright, so what I want to do is tweak my collider. And since this is a prefab, there's something pretty magical we can do. I guess it's magic. I don't know. I'm going to take the game and, oops, don't do that. I'm going to drag and drop it right there. So I have more real estate. So what we have is my enemy's capsule collider already digging into the environment here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to raise it up, maybe shrink its radius, put it downwards. So basically my collider's not intersecting with geometry too much. But it's still a pretty big area for my player to hit. Very forgiving, in fact. So that works on that turret. But what about the one up here? Its capsule collider is still intersecting into my block. Well, look what happens whenever I select my enemy turret where I fix the capsule collider. I'm going to hit apply. See, we have prefab, hit apply. That will change every single prefab turret in my game to have the same kind of collider now. So that's the beauty of prefabs as well. Not only are they a way to save a bunch of work and a bunch of scripts if you attach to something, but it's a way where you can make one change to one turret and it'll make that same change to every duplicate of the turret in your level. Beautiful. So now, hopefully my turrets won't destroy themselves as soon as we press play again. Alright, let's see what happens. Oh, nice. Well, everything's coming at me, bro. Alright, so what's going on here? Whoa. I think I know what I got going on. All my enemies need to have their test enemy script attribute turned off. Maybe that'll do it. I think I know what the problem is. I want these two enemies to attack from behind. And I just assumed that since I had both of them selected earlier, and I clicked attack from behind, they would be. But I don't think that one picked up the attack from behind. Great. So now I've double checked to make sure that both those beginning enemies attack from behind. Alright. Why don't we go ahead and hit play. So now I finally got all my enemies disappeared until I meet them. My turrets aren't exploding, and all the enemies that are attacking from behind are rightfully checked. So let me press enter to start flying through my level. Boom, there's my first enemy coming straight on. Now my turrets see me. Now I'm getting enemies from behind following me. So this is a big old hairball. And I have my dog fighter hidden right here, but he doesn't show up till it goes off screen. And there he comes from off screen, wanting to destroy me. I'm going to do some tricky flying and make him crash into that little beam right there. And that is some pretty decent gameplay for maybe like 10 minutes of work. Not bad. So why don't we see how we can place my boss in the level as well. Alright, and we can also test to see if the boss activates right at the right spot. So here's my enemy boss. He's all the way at the beginning of my level. I'm going to take and drag him to the back where my cube is. And it might be tempting to go ahead and place him at your cube, which is, that might be what I would do. But am I going to have to fly through my whole freaking level to test my boss? Or can I just cheat a little bit? I'm going to cheat. I want to grab my screen controller. And who said my screen controller has to be zeroed out at the beginning of my game? I can take my screen controller right here, push it back, and now my game starts back here. And I can go forward. Okay. Or if I want to test my boss, I can grab my screen controller and just shove it all the way through my level. And I'm going to go ahead and see how my player's still stuck in the bottom left. I'm going to go ahead and kind of center him out. I'll keep him in the back of the screen though. All right, so my player's right here. I press play. Now I'll press enter. There's my boss right there. Oh, he just flew into the level and died. All right, so not a very good place for my boss. So I want you guys to think about your boss cube, not where your boss should be, but where your camera stops so you can fight the boss. So your camera's going to stop right here. Maybe we should take my screen controller. So this is where your camera's going to stop. See how I have my screen controller handles like right on the cube? That's great. So it might be nice to, if you have your game view and scene view side by side, at this point it might be nice to click your game view and drag it and kind of dock it next to your inspector. That way you can see both your scene and your game. I can take my enemy boss and place him exactly where I want him, which is kind of at this side of the screen. I'm going to press play, and we'll see how my boss behaves. All right, he gets destroyed instantly. I'm going to put him down here maybe. Perfect. Oh, is my boss just going to keep flying off into the distance? Let me tweak my boss. All right, so why did he keep flying forward? I wanted to go up and down, that's good. But my boss kept flying forward because I gave him a speed of 100. I'm going to take my speed down to 0. You'll notice that I have a vertical amount of 302. So that's what's going to keep him going up and down. But now that he has no speed, he's just going to stay in place and shoot at me, like so. That's a pretty good boss location. I'm going to test it real quick. I'm going to take my screen controller and bring my player off screen. I know what's going on. My test enemy attribute is checked true for my boss. So I'll uncheck it. Now, very good. You can see my boss right here is invisible. My player's right here. And when I press enter in my game view, then we can see when I get close enough, hopefully my boss will appear. Boom. And hopefully my camera will stop right there, right with my cube in the middle. And that is a boss encounter. Perfect. So that pretty much does it for all I have to say about enemy placement. The main thing you're going to want to do is keep tweaking things. Test your parts of your level just by moving your screen controller group to any part in the level that you want to tweak. So don't feel like you're obligated to start at the beginning of your level every single time. No, that's simply not true. We can just take our screen controller and place it anywhere. The main thing is we got to make sure we're zeroed out on my position X with my screen controller. Pretty much that's the name of the game, right? Everything that's part of the game needs to be on the X-axis. The only things that I think shouldn't be right in the middle are just visual flair. See these little platforms in the background? That's fine. But all your enemies, your player, parts of the environment that you can fly around and collide into, and certainly your boss, all need to be pretty much down the center of the level. Alright, so I basically have a level made. I could spend more time placing the enemies, but I'm not going to. So what I'm going to do is going to go to File, Save As Scenes, and then that's level A. That's the name of my level. My first level is called level A. Pretty creative. But this time I'm going to call it 002. So now I have two different checkpoints, or two different saves for this one level in case I want to go back to an earlier save when maybe it wasn't so populated with things. Alright, so that does it for this day. A lot of creative stuff to do, building your level, making your screen controllers so you can scroll through the level, and placing your enemies and boss. Alright, a lot of stuff done today. We need to get to work. Thanks, guys.